Before we start, there's a whole library of exclusive content you're missing out on. Patreon only, nowhere else. Link in the description. Okay, on to the video. The old man at Sinchon Station, exit 4, collapsed against the tiled wall just as the train below rattled past. Taehyung caught the body before it hit the concrete and lowered the stranger onto a flattened cardboard sheet. The smell of soju and wet wool rose from the man's coat in a sharp, invisible cloud. A woman in a Samsung lanyard walked past without slowing her pace toward the turnstiles. Two students with Hongdae shopping bags glanced over and kept moving toward the escalator. Taehyung pressed 2 fingers under the stranger's jaw and counted a slow pulse beating against the cold skin. The old man whispered that the pharmacy on the corner had refused to sell him anything without a card. Taehyung pulled out a worn leather wallet and counted what was left inside it. One 10,000 won note sat folded between an expired transit card and a receipt for instant noodles. That bill was supposed to feed Taehyung until Friday payday at the small accounting firm in Yeouido. The calculation took less than 2 seconds before the note left the wallet and pressed into the old man's palm. The stranger asked the name of the person handing over a final meal. "Get yourself something hot and call the shelter on Mapo Road tonight," Taehyung answered while standing up. The old man said that a debt like this gets repaid in another life by people who remember faces. Taehyung shrugged and walked toward the exit with empty pockets and a slow ache in his stomach. The voice arrived between the 3rd and 4th step up the concrete stairs of exit 4. It sounded neither male nor female and carried no echo and no warmth at all. The voice announced that a system had bound itself to the consciousness of Taehyung at precisely 21:47 on a Tuesday in March. Taehyung stopped on the stairs and gripped the metal handrail until his knuckles went white. Every coin given freely to a person in genuine need returns multiplied by exactly 10, the voice stated without pause. Performance and calculation and hidden expectation cancel the rule entirely and produce nothing in return. Taehyung asked the empty stairwell whether anyone else could hear the broadcast happening inside a single skull. The voice replied that the contract operated on one carrier and one carrier only. A drunk salaryman pushed past on the stairs and muttered that the kid in the cheap suit should move aside. Taehyung climbed the rest of the way and emerged onto the sidewalk near a convenience store, glowing under fluorescent signage. The air outside carried fried oil and exhaust and the metal scent of an approaching spring rain. Taehyung walked 4 blocks to Namdaemun Market because doubt required a second test before any belief could form. A woman in her 60s sat behind a folding table stacked with bundles of dried laver from Wando Island. Her hands were cracked along the knuckles, and she rubbed them together every few seconds against the cold. Tang asked the price for the largest bundle and learned it cost 50,000 won. The remaining balance on his Hyundai card was 62,000 won until Friday morning. Taehyung tapped the card on the small reader and accepted the bundle wrapped in brown paper and twine. The woman bowed twice and said that her grandson would eat a proper dinner because of this purchase. Taehyung answered that the laver looked excellent and that she should keep the change as a small gift. The transfer notification arrived at 23:09 while Taehyung sat on a bench outside the market gate. An unknown sender, named only as Park J, had deposited 500,000 won into his account. The memo line on the transfer read simply, "Settlement for prior obligation," with no further explanation attached. Taehyung stared at the screen until the digits stopped looking like a glitch on the banking app. A homeless man in a torn padded jacket shuffled past the bench, dragging a black plastic bag behind him. Taehyung stood up and asked the stranger whether anything hot had crossed his lips since the morning. The man named Chol said that a bowl of rice from a temple kitchen had carried him through the day. 200,000 won transferred from one phone to another over the next 90 seconds in silence. By 400 on Wednesday morning, the account balance had grown to 2,100,000 won. Taehyung sat at the small folding table inside the Sinchon studio apartment and stared at the banking screen. The cup of instant noodles on the table had gone cold, and the broth had developed a thin, oily skin. The mechanical voice spoke again and confirmed that 23 transactions had completed within the contract terms. Taehyung asked the voice what would happen if a wealthy banker pretended to give and expected the multiplier. Nothing would happen because the rule reads intention and not gesture. The voice answered without hesitation. Taehyung asked who else had ever carried this contract before tonight, and what had become of them. The voice replied that the question fell outside the parameters available for disclosure during the introductory period. The phone buzzed against the table with a new alert from the Hana Bank app at 0418. Another sender had deposited 800,000 won, with a memo line referencing a forgotten loan repayment. Taehyung opened a fresh document on the laptop and began listing every shelter in the Mapo district. The list ran to 14 entries before sunrise pressed gray light against the studio window facing the alley. A new sound entered the room at 0631, when the building intercom buzzer rang twice in quick succession. The delivery courier downstairs asked whether anyone named Yoon Taehyung lived in Unit 407. A signed envelope from a law office in Gangnam waited at the door and contained a single printed page. The page named Taehyung as the unexpected beneficiary of a settled estate worth 12 million won. The law office on the 7th floor of a Gangnam tower opened its doors at exactly 0900, and Yoon Taehyung walked through them at 0902. A receptionist in a navy blazer asked the visitor to sign a confidentiality form before any documents could be released. The pen in Taehyung's hand trembled twice before steadying against the paper on the polished marble counter. A small ficus in the corner gave off the dry green smell of an office plant watered by schedule. The lawyer named Bae Junho explained that the deceased benefactor had requested complete anonymity in all matters. Taehyung asked whether the estate documents contained any clue about how the donor had selected a recipient. Bae Junho replied that the instruction sheet listed only a name and a national identity number, and nothing else. The transfer of 12 million won would clear into the Hana Bank account by close of business on Thursday. Taehyung walked out of the tower and stood on the sidewalk while 3 black sedans rolled past toward Tehran Road. The mechanical voice spoke again and confirmed that the estate counted as a valid multiplier return on prior gifts. 2 homeless men sat on a low wall outside the subway entrance, sharing a single can of warm coffee. Taehyung approached them and asked whether either man needed a meal or a bed for the coming week. The older one, named Hyun, said that the city shelter on Socho Road had filled up by Sunday evening. The younger one, named Doyun, said that a hot bowl of solongtang would carry him through the next 2 days. Taehyung transferred 300,000 won to each of them after verifying their bank apps still worked. Hyun stared at the phone screen for a long moment and asked whether the transfer was some kind of joke. Taehyung answered that the money was real and that the only request was to eat properly that day. Doyun pressed both hands together and bowed so deeply that the empty coffee can rolled off the wall. The voice in Taehyung's head announced that 6 million won had cleared into the account from 3 sources. A construction firm in Pangyo had refunded an old deposit that Taehyung had never made in any life. The afternoon meeting at the small accounting firm in Yeouido turned strange before the second cup of green tea. The department head, named Oh Sung-min, called Taehyung into the glass conference room overlooking the river. Oh Sung-min asked why a junior staffer had suddenly become the subject of 3 discreet calls that morning. The callers had refused to name themselves, but had asked detailed questions about employment history and trustworthiness. Taehyung answered that no explanation existed for the calls, and that nothing illegal had taken place. Oh Sung-min tapped a silver pen against the table and said that quiet money always carried loud questions. The senior accountant added that anyone asking about a staffer by name had either offered work or trouble. Taehyung promised to report any further contact and walked back to a cubicle that suddenly felt very small. The phone vibrated at 15:47 with an unknown number from a Seoul exchange and a polite male voice. The caller identified himself as Director Choi of a private wealth advisory firm based in the Lotte Tower. Director Choi said that a mutual acquaintance had recommended a meeting concerning unusual cash flow management. Taehyung asked which acquaintance, and the line went silent for 4 full seconds before the call dropped. The mechanical voice stated that external attention had triggered the contract's first observable threat assessment. Taehyung asked the voice whether the system offered any protection against people who tracked banking irregularities. The voice answered that the system read intention and multiplied gifts and offered nothing beyond those 2 functions. Protection of the carrier remained entirely the responsibility of the carrier and of any allies the carrier might cultivate. Taehyung left the office at 1800 and rode the Line 2 train toward Sinchon while reviewing the account. 47 separate deposits had landed during the workday from sources scattered across 6 different banks. The total balance now stood at 28 million won, and the figure climbed every 40 minutes on average. A woman across the aisle stared at her phone and quietly cried into the sleeve of a Uniqlo sweater. The woman got off at Hongik University Station, and Taehyung followed her up the stairs without thinking. On the street, she leaned against a lamppost and whispered into the phone that the deposit deadline had passed. Taehyung asked whether anything could be done by a stranger willing to listen for 2 minutes only. The woman named Sora said that her younger brother needed surgery, and the family lacked 3 million won. Taehyung asked for the hospital bank account information and transferred the full amount within 90 seconds. Sora dropped the phone and stared at the receipt screen, and then stared at the face of a stranger. She asked what kind of person handed 3 million won to a crying woman outside a Hongdae subway exit. The answer came short and honest, that a system paid the giver back, and the rule allowed nothing else. Sora did not understand the explanation, but she wrote down a phone number and pressed it into a palm. She said that her family ran a small printing shop in Mapo, and that any favor would be returned. Taehyung pocketed the number and walked the remaining 6 blocks toward the studio under a slow drizzle. The drizzle carried the smell of asphalt and fried chicken and the metallic edge of distant thunder. The studio door stood unlocked when Taehyung reached the 4th floor landing at 1934 that evening. Inside the small room, a man in a charcoal suit sat on the single folding chair beside the window. The stranger introduced himself as Jung Woo-sok and laid a business card from a private banking division on the table. Jung Woo-sok said that a conversation about 30 million won and counting could not wait until Monday morning. Jung Woo-sok did not stand up when Yoon Taehyung entered the small studio apartment at 1934. The banker gestured toward the empty floor cushion across from the folding chair, as if hosting his own meeting. A leather briefcase rested against the chair leg, and a silver fountain pen lay across a closed notebook. The smell of expensive cologne filled the room, and overpowered the usual scent of instant noodles and damp laundry. Taehyung asked which lock had opened a door that the tenant himself had personally bolted that morning. Jung Woo-sok answered that the building manager downstairs accepted small courtesies in exchange for small favors. The banker added that 30 million won in unexplained deposits attracted attention from people far less polite than himself. Taehyung sat down on the cushion and placed both hands flat against the low table between them. Jung Woo-sok opened the notebook and read aloud the exact balance of the Hana Bank account at that moment. 41 million won had cleared during the past 3 hours, from a dozen separate sources across 6 provinces. The bank's compliance algorithm had flagged the account at the 30 million threshold for mandatory review on Friday. Jung Woo-sok offered a private banking arrangement that would route the deposits through a less visible structure. Taehyung asked what percentage the private banking division charged for the privilege of moving the money quietly. Jung Woo-sok smiled and said that the fee began at 4% and dropped as the assets grew larger. The banker added that a partnership with the right firm could prevent visits from people carrying less attractive offers. Taehyung asked whose visit would arrive next if the offer on the table happened to be politely declined. Jung Woo-suk closed the notebook and answered that the National Tax Service operated faster than most expected. The banker added that certain private collectors monitored the same compliance flags and dispatched representatives within days. Taehyung said that the conversation had been informative and that a decision would arrive by Thursday at noon. Jung Woo-suk placed the business card on the table and let himself out without offering any handshake at all. The mechanical voice spoke once the door clicked shut, and the elevator hummed downward toward the lobby. Independent banking infrastructure exists outside the contract parameters and remains the responsibility of the carrier, the voice stated. Taehyung asked the voice whether any prior carrier had ever been destroyed by the visibility of the multiplier. The voice replied that disclosure of historical case outcomes remained outside the available parameters during the introductory period. Taehyung pulled out the phone and called the number that Sora had pressed into his palm earlier. A man answered on the third ring and introduced himself as An Ji-hoon from the family printing shop in Mapo. Taehyung asked whether the shop offered services for setting up a small private foundation with proper legal paperwork. An Ji-hoon laughed and said that printing letterhead was easy, but that a real lawyer would be required. Sora took the phone from her father and offered to drive Taehyung to a trusted lawyer the next morning. The trusted lawyer was her aunt named Yoo Mi-rae, who had spent 15 years inside the Seoul prosecutor's office. Yoo Mi-rae had quit the government 3 years earlier and now ran a small practice serving small clients. Taehyung agreed to meet at 09:30 on Thursday at a cafe near Sinchon Station, Exit 4. The Sinchon Cafe smelled of dark roasted beans and yuzu syrup when Taehyung arrived 12 minutes early. Yoo Mi-rae sat at a corner table, wearing a gray cardigan and reading a worn copy of the Civil Code. She looked up and asked the new client to explain in plain language what the situation actually required. Taehyung described 40 million won arriving without explanation and a banker appearing inside a locked apartment. Yoo Mi-rae closed the book and asked whether the deposits came from genuine business activity or from a hidden source. Taehyung answered that no business activity existed and that the deposits arrived in response to charitable gifts. The lawyer raised one eyebrow and asked what kind of charity produced a tenfold return within 60 minutes. Taehyung said that the mechanism could not be explained in legal terms, but that the result was verifiable. Yoo Mi-rae studied the face across the table for a long moment and tapped one finger against the book. She said that the National Tax Service would demand a documented source and that improvisation would lead to prosecution. The only safe path forward involved a registered charitable foundation with transparent inflows and outflows on paper. The foundation would receive the deposits as donations from anonymous benefactors and would disperse them to verified recipients. Taehyung asked how quickly such a foundation could be registered and how much the setup would cost. Yoo Mi-rae answered that proper registration required 4 weeks, but that an emergency structure could function within 5 days. The legal fees would total 6 million won, and the foundation would need a board of 3 trustworthy individuals. Taehyung transferred the fee within 30 seconds and asked Yoo Mi-rae to serve as the first board member. The lawyer accepted on the condition that every disbursement would pass through proper audit and proper documentation. The second board seat would go to An Ji-hoon for his stability and his knowledge of small business operations. The third seat remained open, and Yoo Mi-rae warned that the wrong choice would destroy the entire structure. Taehyung promised to identify a third trustee within 7 days and signed the preliminary engagement letter on the spot. Outside the cafe, 2 men in dark windbreakers stood across the street, pretending to read a posted bus schedule. Taehyung noticed the angle of their attention and the position of one hand inside a jacket pocket. Yoo Mi-rae followed the line of sight and quietly suggested leaving through the kitchen exit behind the espresso machine. The cafe owner accepted 20,000 won and waved them toward a service door opening onto a narrow alley. The 2 windbreakers split up and circled the block before Yoon Taehyung and Yoo Mi-rae reached the alley exit. One of the men appeared at the far end of the narrow passage, holding a phone against his ear and watching. Yumi-rae grabbed Taehyung by the elbow and steered him into the open service door of a fish market. The smell of brine and crushed ice and morning catch wrapped around them like a thick, wet curtain. The market owner named Bok Young-soo recognized Yumi-rae from a contract dispute settled 2 years earlier. Bok Young-soo waved them through the back of the shop and out a side door opening onto Sinchon Main Road. A taxi rolled past at the exact moment they emerged, and Yumi-rae raised one hand to flag it down. The driver agreed to take them to Mapo Road for an extra 20,000 won, and no questions about the hurry. Inside the taxi, Yumi-rae asked whether anything in the morning routine had revealed the cafe location to outsiders. Taehyung answered that only Sora and her father, An Ji-hoon, had known the meeting time and the place. Yumi-rae replied that the leak had come from somewhere else, and that the banker, Jang Woo-suk, knew the neighborhood. The mechanical voice spoke quietly and confirmed that surveillance protocols outside the contract remained the carrier's problem to solve. The printing shop in Mapo occupied the ground floor of a 4-story building behind a small playground. An Ji-hoon met them at the back entrance and locked the metal shutter behind the taxi the moment they entered. Sora set 3 cups of barley tea on a work table cluttered with ink samples and proof sheets for wedding invitations. Yumi-rae explained that the 3rd trustee position needed filling within days rather than the original 7. An Ji-hoon suggested a retired soldier named Go Dae-sung, who had supplied the shop with paper for 8 years. Go Dae-sung had served 24 years in the Marine Corps before opening a small wholesale paper business. The man spoke little and kept clean accounts, and had refused 2 bribes from local developers over the past decade. Taehyung asked whether Go Dae-sung could be reached for a meeting before the close of business that day. Sora called the paper warehouse and confirmed that Go Dae-sung would arrive at the shop within 40 minutes. The retired Marine walked through the back door at 13:48, carrying a clipboard and wearing a navy windbreaker. Go Dae-sung listened to the proposal for 11 minutes without interrupting and without changing the expression on his face. The Marine asked one question only, about whether the foundation would ever knowingly disperse funds to organized criminal interests. Taehyung answered that no disbursement would ever cross that line under any pressure from any direction. Ko Dae-sung set the clipboard on the table and signed the preliminary trustee acceptance form with a steady hand. Yumi-rae took the signed forms and announced that the foundation would file the emergency registration on Monday morning. The temporary name selected for the structure was the Bareun Path Charitable Foundation, registered in the Mapo district. The phone vibrated at 14:32 with an unknown number from a Busan exchange and a calm female voice. The caller identified herself as Officer Lim Soo-jin from the Financial Intelligence Unit of the National Police Agency. Officer Lim Soo-jin asked whether the account holder could attend a voluntary interview at the Yongsan office on Friday. Taehyung agreed to the interview and ended the call before any further details could be requested over the line. Yumi-rae frowned and said that the police rarely called holders of 40 million won for voluntary interviews. The lawyer added that someone had filed a complaint or that someone had pulled a favor inside the financial unit. Ko Dae-sung suggested that a former colleague, now serving in the police logistics division, could identify the complainant. The retired Marine made one phone call and received a name within 19 minutes from across the city. The complainant was registered as a numbered corporate entity tied to a Pangyo address with no public face. The corporate entity had filed 3 other complaints during the past year against individuals receiving unusual deposits. Each of the prior 3 individuals had subsequently lost custody of their accounts to court-ordered asset freezes. Yumi-rae stood up and said that Friday at Yongsan would either secure the foundation or end it entirely. Taehyung asked the system whether the contract allowed any acceleration of returns through larger deliberate giving. The voice replied that any gift carrying genuine intention triggered the rule regardless of size or speed of delivery. Taehyung opened the banking app and transferred 2 million won to the Mapo District Shelter Coordination Center. The transfer cleared at 15:11, and the multiplier deposits began arriving at 15:23 from 4 separate sources. 20 million won landed in the account across the next 90 minutes from sources scattered around the country. Yumi-rae watched the deposits roll in and quietly asked whether the rule had ever produced a failed transaction. Taehyung answered that no gift given honestly had ever failed to return, and that the system tolerated no doubt. Go Dae-sung observed the screen without comment, and then asked one direct question about long-term sustainability. The Marine wanted to know whether the contract included any condition that could cause the multiplier to stop. The voice in Taehyung's head answered that the rule continued as long as the carrier gave with genuine intention. Performance and calculation and hidden expectation would cancel the rule and produce nothing in return for the giver. Taehyung relayed the conditions to the 3 people in the room and watched their faces process the information. At 16:47, the metal shutter at the back of the printing shop rattled twice from a heavy impact outside. Go Dae-sung moved to the wall and lifted a section of the shutter just enough to see the alley. 3 men in dark suits stood beside a black sedan, and one of them held a folded legal document. The man with the document called out that a court order required immediate access to one Yoon Taehyung. Go Dae-sung lowered the shutter and signaled the others to stay back from the metal door. The retired Marine asked Yumi-rae whether the proper response involved opening the door or calling the police. Yumi-rae stepped forward and demanded through the shutter that the document be slid underneath for review. The man outside hesitated and then pushed a folded paper through the gap at the bottom of the metal. Yumi-rae unfolded the page and scanned the seal and the case number and the issuing judge's signature. The lawyer announced that the document was a civil preservation order rather than a criminal warrant or seizure. The order requested temporary freezing of the Hana bank account, pending investigation of potential financial irregularities. Yumi-rae added that the order required service by a registered court bailiff and not by suited strangers. Go Dae-sung raised the shutter halfway and asked the lead man to present official identification from the Seoul District Court. The man refused and insisted that the document spoke for itself, and that resistance would create additional legal trouble. Go Dae-sung lowered the shutter again and called the court verification line on a printing shop landline. The clerk at the verification line confirmed that no such order had been issued by any judge that morning. The Marine returned to the shutter and informed the 3 men that the court had no record of the document. The lead man stepped back toward the sedan and made a call on a small black phone for 19 seconds. The black sedan reversed out of the alley within 90 seconds and disappeared toward the main road. Yumi-rae sat down heavily on a stool and asked whether anyone had photographed the license plate of the car. Sora produced a phone and showed 3 clear shots of the rear plate, captured through a gap in the shutter. Go Dae-sung copied the number into a notebook and called the same former colleague who had named the complainant. The colleague confirmed within 12 minutes that the plate belonged to a private security firm based in Pangyo. The firm specialized in retrieval services for clients who preferred to avoid the public court system entirely. The mechanical voice spoke at 17:34 and informed the carrier that the contract had registered a hostile contact event. The voice added that the rule continued to operate, but that the carrier remained responsible for physical and legal defense. Taehyung asked whether the system could identify the human owner standing behind the Pangyo corporate shell. The voice replied that identification of external parties fell outside the contract parameters under all conditions. An Ji-hoon suggested that the printing shop should not host the foundation operations any longer than necessary. The shop owner offered to find a small office in Mapo, within walking distance of the police station and the courts. Yumi-rae approved the suggestion and added that the new office needed a registered tenant who was not Taehyung. Go Dae-sung volunteered to sign the lease under the name of his paper wholesale business and accept the small rent. Taehyung asked the team whether the Friday interview at Yongsan should still proceed as originally arranged. Yu Mi-rae answered that the police interview would proceed and that legal counsel would attend at the carrier's side. The lawyer added that a refusal to attend would trigger a formal summons within days and would worsen every outcome. Go Dae-sung suggested arriving 30 minutes early and exiting through a different door than the entrance used. At 1912, Taehyung returned alone to the Sinchon studio, under a thin rain that smelled of cold asphalt. The studio door showed fresh scratches around the deadbolt that had not existed when the tenant left in the morning. Taehyung did not enter the apartment and instead walked back down the stairs and into a small noodle shop. The owner of the noodle shop, named Bae-hyun Mi, recognized the regular customer and prepared a bowl without being asked. Bae-hyun Mi was 63 years old and had run the shop alone for 19 years since her husband died. The bowl of jjajangmyeon arrived steaming with the sharp, salty smell of fermented bean paste and fresh scallion. Taehyung asked Bae-hyun Mi whether business had been steady through the recent slow months in the neighborhood. The owner answered that the landlord had raised the rent twice and that closure by autumn looked increasingly likely. Taehyung transferred 8 million won to Bae-hyun Mi after confirming the bank account printed on the shop receipt. The owner stared at the phone screen and asked whether the customer had made an error with the decimal point. Taehyung answered that the transfer was correct and that the only condition involved keeping the shop open another year. Bae-hyun Mi bowed 3 times and pressed both palms against the counter and could not speak for nearly a minute. The multiplier deposits began arriving at 1951 from sources scattered across Seoul and 2 southern provinces. 80 million won landed in the account across the next 2 hours from 47 separate transactions. Taehyung walked to a Hongdae internet cafe and used a public terminal to research the Pangyo corporate entity. The shell company traced through 3 layers to a holding firm registered under the name Shin Cheolwoo Group. The Shin Cheolwoo Group operated quietly in private equity and had filed 11 similar civil preservation actions during the past 5 years. Each prior target had eventually lost a controlling interest in their assets to companies linked to the same group. The pattern indicated a deliberate strategy for harvesting individuals who came into sudden wealth through unexplained channels. Taehyung saved screenshots of the corporate registry data onto a small encrypted drive purchased from the cafe counter. At 22:18, the phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number containing only an address in Cheongdam. The message stated that the sender of the message wished to meet privately and would wait until midnight only. The mechanical voice spoke immediately and warned that the carrier should not attend any meeting arranged on these terms. Taehyung typed a reply requesting the sender's name and received a 1-word answer that read, Shin. Taehyung forwarded the Cheongdam address to Yu Mi-rae at 22:24, along with a screenshot of the signed text. The lawyer called back within 90 seconds and demanded a clear answer about whether the meeting would actually happen. Taehyung answered that the meeting would happen at a different time and place chosen by the foundation team. The mechanical voice noted that the carrier had begun applying tactical judgment to threats outside the contract parameters. Yu Mi-rae proposed a public coffee shop in Yeouido at 1100 on Saturday morning, with multiple witnesses present. Go Dae-sung agreed to attend in a support role, along with 2 former Marines from his old unit. An Ji-hoon offered the printing shop van as transport that would not connect back to the foundation office. Taehyung sent a reply text proposing the new venue and the new time and received agreement within 4 minutes. The Friday interview at the Yongsan Financial Intelligence Office began at 0900 with Officer Lim Soo-jin and 2 assistants. Lim Soo-jin was 41 years old and wore a navy suit and tapped a black pen against a closed folder constantly. The officer opened with a question about the source of 40 deposits totaling 118 million won. Yu Mi-rae answered on the carrier's behalf that the deposits represented donations to a charitable structure under formation. Lim Soo-jin asked why the deposits had arrived in a personal account rather than in a registered foundation account. Yu Mi-rae replied that the foundation was completing emergency registration and that the personal account served as a temporary clearinghouse. The officer asked whether the foundation could produce a list of all donors with verified identities and stated purposes. Yu Mi-rae presented a printed list of 107 donors with bank-verified names and contribution amounts. Lim Soo-jin studied the printed list and asked how a foundation under formation had already collected donor identification documents. Yu Mi-rae answered that the donors had voluntarily provided identification through the standard interbank transfer verification system. The officer flipped to the third page and circled 4 names with a red pen and asked about those specific donors. 3 of the 4 names matched individuals who had been investigated previously for unrelated financial irregularities. Yu Mi-rae responded that the foundation accepted donations from any source not flagged on official sanction lists. The officer asked whether the foundation intended to return donations from individuals later proven to have committed financial crimes. Yu Mi-rae answered that the foundation board would address such situations on a case-by-case basis under counsel. Lim Soo-jin closed the folder at 10:47 and stated that the interview would conclude pending further document review. Outside the Yongsan building, Yu Mi-rae stopped on the sidewalk and turned toward the carrier with a hard expression. The lawyer asked whether the 4 flagged donors had any connection to anyone known by the carrier personally. Taehyung answered that no donor was known personally and that all multiplier returns arrived through the system's mechanism. Yu Mi-rae warned that someone had planted those 4 donors deliberately to create a paper trail for prosecution. The mechanical voice spoke at 11:14 and confirmed that the contract did not select the identities of multiplier sources. The voice added that external parties could potentially route legitimate funds through the multiplier to manufacture compromising connections. Taehyung asked the system whether any defense existed against such deliberate poisoning of the return channel. The voice replied that the contract operated on intention and that incoming funds carried no intention requirement at all. Yu Mi-rae proposed a new operational rule that every multiplier deposit would be transferred to the foundation within 24 hours. The foundation would document each transfer as a personal donation from the carrier and not as anonymous incoming funds. Taehyung agreed and immediately transferred the full personal account balance to the temporary foundation holding account. The transfer of 118 million won cleared at 12:31 on Friday afternoon under proper documentation. The Saturday meeting at the Yeouido coffee shop began at 1100, with Shin Cheolwoo arriving alone in a charcoal coat. Shin Cheolwoo was 57 years old and wore a Patek Philippe watch and carried no visible briefcase or folder. The private equity head sat down across from Taehyung and set a small white teacup on the polished oak table. 2 former Marines occupied a corner table, while Go Dae-sung sat at the counter facing the entrance directly. Shin Cheolwoo opened with a compliment about the foundation registration and the speed of its temporary structure. The man added that a young carrier of unusual financial mechanisms required protection that small lawyers could not provide. Taehyung asked which financial mechanism the visitor believed had produced the recent activity in the personal account. Shin Cheolwoo smiled and answered that the mechanism mattered less than the question of who would control the outflow. Shin Cheolwoo proposed a partnership in which the Shin Cheolwoo Group would manage the foundation's investment portfolio. The proposed management fee was 2% annually, with performance bonuses tied to charitable disbursement growth. Taehyung asked whether the prior 11 targets of civil preservation actions had received similar partnership offers. Shin Cheolwoo paused for 4 seconds and answered that the prior targets had declined the offers and had suffered accordingly. Taehyung declined the partnership and stated that the foundation would operate independently under its current trustee structure. Shin Cheolwoo finished the tea and stood up and warned that independence carried costs beyond the carrier's current understanding. The private equity head walked out at 11:46 without offering any handshake and without looking back at the table. Go Dae-sung followed the man at a distance and confirmed that a black sedan collected him at the corner. The mechanical voice spoke at 12:08 and registered the meeting as a formal declaration of hostile intent. The voice added that the contract permitted the carrier to give freely toward defensive infrastructure if intention remained genuine. Taehyung immediately transferred 15 million won to the families of injured workers at a Pohang shipyard accident. The multiplier returns began at 12:31 and reached 150 million won by the close of business that day. The fire alarm at the Mapo Foundation office triggered at 03:47 on Sunday morning during heavy rain. Go Dae-sung received the building security call within 90 seconds and reached the office by 04:12 in a taxi. The front door stood open, and the interior smelled of accelerant and burnt paper and melted plastic from a coffee machine. The fire had been small and contained by the building's sprinkler system before structural damage occurred on the office floor. Go Dae-sung photographed the scene before the police arrived and noted that the filing cabinet stood undamaged in the corner. The cabinet contained the original signed trustee acceptance forms and the preliminary foundation registration paperwork. The retired Marine called Taehyung at 04:31 and reported that the strike had targeted the office, but had failed completely. The mechanical voice noted at 04:33 that the contract registered the arson as confirmation of hostile escalation by external parties. Taehyung arrived at the Mapo office at 05:08 and stood beside Go Dae-sung while the Seoul fire investigators worked the scene. The lead investigator, named Han Ji-won, identified the accelerant as low-grade kerosene poured through the mail slot. Han Ji-won was 34 years old and had served 6 years in the arson division of the Metropolitan Police. The investigator stated that the technique matched 3 prior small commercial arsons attributed to a contracted crew from Incheon. Yu Mi-rae arrived at 05:42 and immediately filed an emergency report with the prosecutor handling the foundation registration. The lawyer requested expedited registration approval on the grounds of documented hostile action against the trustee structure. The prosecutor's office responded by 9 a.m. Monday morning with full registration approval and an assigned case number. The Bareun Path Charitable Foundation existed as a legal entity under Korean law at 09:14 on the Monday. Sora called at 11:03 on Monday and reported that her father had received a visit at the printing shop. 2 men in delivery uniforms had asked An Ji-hoon detailed questions about printing orders for the foundation letterhead. An Ji-hoon had answered nothing and had photographed the men through the shop window after they departed. Sora forwarded the photographs to Go Dae-sung, who matched one face to a former employee of the Pangyo retrieval firm. Taehyung opened the foundation banking application and reviewed the consolidated balance at 13:27 on Monday afternoon. The foundation account held 273 million won after the weekend multiplier returns had cleared properly. The carrier authorized a disbursement of 50 million won to the Mapo Shelter Coordination Center for winter heating assistance. The shelter coordinator, named Jo Eun-bi, called personally at 14:11 and asked whether the donation came with any conditions. Jo Eun-bi was 29 years old and had run the shelter coordination office for 3 years on a minimal budget. Taehyung answered that the only condition required quarterly reporting on the number of beds funded by the disbursement. Jo Eun-bi agreed and offered to visit the foundation office on Friday to present the operational plan in person. The carrier accepted and ended the call and immediately authorized a second disbursement of 30 million won to a Mapo soup kitchen. The multiplier returns from these 2 foundation disbursements arrived between 15:47 and 19:23 on Monday evening. 800 million won landed across 147 separate transactions from sources scattered across all 8 provinces. Yu Mi-rae watched the consolidated balance climb past 1 billion won and asked whether the rate of giving could sustain. Taehyung answered that the giving would continue and that the foundation would scale operations to match the inflow. At 20:14 on Monday evening, the phone vibrated with a call from Officer Lim Soo-jin at the Yongsan office. The officer reported that the Financial Intelligence Unit had received an anonymous complaint about the arson on Sunday morning. The complaint alleged that the foundation had staged the fire to generate sympathy and to accelerate registration approval. Lim Soo-jin added that the complaint included photographs taken from inside the office before the fire department arrived. Yoo Mi-rae took the phone and asked Lim Soo-jin to share the timestamp data on the submitted photographs immediately. The officer confirmed that the photographs carried timestamps from 3:31 on Sunday morning, 16 minutes before the alarm. The lawyer demanded that the Financial Intelligence Unit forward the photographs to the arson investigation team at Mapo Station. Lim Soo-jin agreed and stated that the photograph metadata would identify the device that had captured the original images. Han Ji-won at the Mapo Arson Division called Go Dae-sung at 22:48 on Monday with results from the metadata analysis. The photographs had originated from a phone registered to a security contractor employed by the Shin Cheolwoo Group. The arson investigation now connected the fire directly to the private equity group through documented digital evidence. Han Ji-won stated that an arrest warrant for the security contractor would be requested from the Seoul District Court on Tuesday. Taehyung asked the system at 23:14 whether the foundation could legally absorb funds recovered through criminal asset forfeiture proceedings. The voice replied that the contract operated on the carrier's outgoing intention and not on the legal status of incoming funds. The voice added that recovered criminal assets transferred to the foundation would not trigger any multiplier return effect. Taehyung confirmed that the foundation would pursue civil damages from the Shin Cheolwoo Group through the proper court process. Yoo Mi-rae filed the civil damages claim at the Seoul Central District Court at 10:30 on Tuesday morning. The claim sought 500 million won in damages, plus full legal costs for the documented arson attack. The Shin Cheolwoo Group responded within 4 hours through a senior litigation partner from a top-tier Gangnam firm. The senior litigation partner, named Yang Jae-sik, requested an immediate private settlement conference at his office in Samsung. Taehyung declined the private settlement conference and insisted on full court proceedings under public docket numbers. Yoo Mi-rae filed the formal rejection at 16:47 on Tuesday afternoon and requested expedited scheduling for the first hearing. The Seoul Central District Court scheduled the first hearing for the following Monday at 1400 in Courtroom 3. The mechanical voice noted at 17:21 that the foundation had executed its first offensive legal action under the contract. The Seoul Central District Court opened the doors of Courtroom 3 at 13:47 on the following Monday afternoon. Yoo Mi-rae arrived first, carrying 3 banker boxes of evidence and a thin black laptop for the projection display. Taehyung followed at 13:52, wearing a plain charcoal suit purchased the previous day at a Hyundai department store. Go Dae-sung occupied the second row, directly behind the plaintiff table, and scanned every face entering the public gallery. Yang Jae-sik entered at 13:58 with 2 junior associates and a paralegal, carrying 4 banker boxes of countering exhibits. The senior litigator was 61 years old and wore a navy 3-piece suit with a Hermes silk pocket square. Yang Jae-sik nodded once toward the plaintiff table and took his seat without offering any direct greeting. The presiding judge, named Kang Hyun-sik, entered at 1400 sharp and called the case onto the formal court record. Yoo Mi-rae opened with the timeline of the arson and the metadata analysis tying the contractor to the defendant group. The lawyer projected the photograph metadata onto the courtroom screen and walked Judge Kang through the digital chain of custody. Yang Jae-sik responded that the contractor had acted independently and that the Shin Cheolwoo Group bore no operational responsibility. The defense counsel cited 2 precedent cases involving contractor liability boundaries under Korean civil tort law from 2019 and 2022. Yoo Mi-rae countered with the prior pattern of 11 civil preservation actions filed by the Shin Cheolwoo Group affiliates. The lawyer requested judicial notice of the pattern as evidence of systematic predation against individuals with sudden financial activity. Yang Chae-sik objected on relevance grounds, and Judge Kang sustained the objection while reserving the pattern evidence for later consideration. The hearing recessed at 15:43, with both sides ordered to submit additional briefs within 10 business days. Outside the courthouse, a young woman approached Taehyung on the steps facing the Socho Road traffic at 1612. The woman introduced herself as Park Sun-young from the Hang-kyoda newspaper covering the foundation registration story. Park Sun-young was 32 years old and had reported on financial corruption for 7 years on a senior investigative desk. The reporter asked for 15 minutes of conversation regarding the unusual donation patterns visible in the foundation public filings. Yoo Mi-rae stepped between the reporter and the carrier and requested a written interview request through the foundation channel. Park Sun-young agreed and handed over a business card and added that the story would publish with or without cooperation. The reporter mentioned that an editor had received an anonymous tip identifying the Shin Cheolwoo Group as the foundation's primary obstacle. Go Dae-sung photographed Park Sun-young discreetly and confirmed later that her press credentials were authentic and currently active. The mechanical voice spoke at 16:47 and stated that public media attention represented both protection and exposure for the carrier. The voice added that the contract did not respond to media coverage, but that the carrier's intention remained the sole variable. Taehyung decided to grant a limited written interview focused on foundation operations and explicit refusal of personal financial disclosure. Yoo Mi-rae drafted the response email to Park Sun-young at 18:24 and sent it from the foundation domain. On Tuesday morning at 7:31, the Hang-kyoda published a profile of the Bareun Path Charitable Foundation on the front digital page. The article described the foundation's 3-month disbursement record and named all 3 trustees with photographs and brief biographies. The piece quoted Park Sun-young's editor, stating that the foundation had distributed more aid in 1 quarter than most peers in a year. The article also referenced ongoing civil litigation, with an unnamed private equity group accused of attempting to obstruct foundation operations. By 11:14 on Tuesday, the foundation phone line had received 460 incoming calls from potential donors and volunteers. Sora and 2 new hires from the Mapo printing shop staff routed the calls and recorded the most credible offers. An Ji-hoon converted half of the printing shop into a temporary call center using equipment funded by the foundation. The mechanical voice noted at 13:08 that media exposure had accelerated the carrier's operational scope by an estimated 12 weeks. Officer Lim Soo-jin called at 15:27 on Tuesday and requested an off-the-record conversation at a Yongsan coffee shop. Taehyung agreed and met the officer at 1700 in a small espresso bar 3 blocks from the Financial Intelligence Office. Lim Soo-jin arrived in civilian clothes and ordered a black coffee and spoke quietly across a corner table for 19 minutes. The officer reported that internal pressure on the foundation case had originated from a deputy commissioner with ties to Shin Cheolwoo. Lim Soo-jin added that the deputy commissioner had ordered the original interview and the donor list review on flimsy grounds. The officer offered to provide internal documentation of the irregular order in exchange for protection from professional retaliation. Taehyung consulted briefly with Yoo Mi-rae by phone and accepted the offer through a formal whistleblower protocol channel. The lawyer arranged for Lim Soo-jin's documentation to enter the civil case record under sealed protective filing on Wednesday. The deputy commissioner named Hwang In-sik received a formal notice of inquiry from the National Police Agency on Thursday morning. Hwang In-sik was 54 years old and had served 27 years in the agency with 3 commendations on record. The inquiry suspended Hwang In-sik from active duty pending review of the irregular order and the underlying communications. The Shin Cheolwoo Group lost its primary channel into the Financial Intelligence Unit At 09:23 on Thursday morning, Young Jasik filed an emergency motion at the Seoul Central District Court at 14:18 on Thursday afternoon. The motion requested a continuance of the civil damages case on grounds of newly discovered procedural irregularities in the metadata analysis. Judge Kong denied the continuance motion at 16:42 and confirmed the briefing schedule for the original 10-day deadline. The mechanical voice noted at 17:09 that the contract had registered a measurable shift in the balance of power. The international call came through the Foundation switchboard at 09:17 on a Tuesday in late June. A senior editor from Forbes Asia in Singapore requested an exclusive feature on the Bareun Path Charitable Foundation operations. The editor named Margaret Chen had spent 4 months tracking the foundation's disbursement records through public Korean filings. Margaret Chen offered cover placement on the September Asian Wealth Edition, reaching 17 million print and digital readers globally. Yu Mi-dae and Go Taehyung debated the offer for 2 hours in the expanded foundation office near Hongdae Station. The new office occupied an entire floor of a 6-story building leased through the foundation under proper documentation. Sora managed a team of 12 full-time staff, handling donor relations and disbursement verification across all 8 provinces. The foundation balance had reached 18 billion won after 4 months of continuous multiplier returns and aggressive charitable disbursement. Taehyung accepted the Forbes feature on the condition that the article focus on foundation operations rather than personal wealth. Margaret Chen arrived in Seoul on the following Monday with a photographer and a senior researcher from the Singapore bureau. The Forbes team spent 6 days observing foundation operations and interviewing trustees and beneficiaries across the Seoul metropolitan region. Park Sun-young from Hankyoreh provided background documentation under a previously negotiated cooperation agreement between the 2 publications. The September Forbes Asia cover appeared on newsstands at 6 o'clock on the first Monday of September. The cover photograph showed Taehyung standing in front of the Mapo soup kitchen with Jo Eun-bi and 3 shelter residents. The headline read, "The Quiet Giver Who Outpaces His Own Earnings," and ran in white text across a deep red background. The article spanned 11 pages and detailed 43 specific charitable interventions funded by the foundation during the past quarter. The Kospi opened at 0900 on Tuesday, and 3 companies linked to the Shin Cheolwoo Group dropped between 4 and 7%. Young Jasik filed an emergency defamation suit against Forbes Asia and Hankyoreh at 11:30 on Tuesday morning. The defamation suit named the foundation as a co-conspirator and demanded a court-ordered retraction of both publications. Judge Kong at the Seoul Central District Court assigned the new case to a different chamber under standard rotation procedures. The mechanical voice spoke at 14:23 on Tuesday and registered the Forbes publication as a structural exposure event. The voice noted that exposure of this magnitude would attract additional hostile parties beyond the original Shin Cheolwoo Group. The voice added that the contract continued to operate within original parameters regardless of any increase in external threat density. Taehyung asked the system whether historical carriers had survived similar exposure events under comparable circumstances. The voice replied that disclosure of prior carrier outcomes remained outside the available parameters under all current conditions. Taehyung pressed the system once more and asked whether the rule had ever been carried by more than one person simultaneously. The voice answered that the contract operated on one carrier and one carrier only during any active operational period. Taehyung accepted the limitation and transferred 2 billion won to a flood relief fund in North Gyeongsang Province at 1547. The multiplier returns from the flood relief disbursement reached 20 billion won by Wednesday evening across 1,700 transactions. The foundation balance climbed past 36 billion won at 21:14 on Wednesday night under proper documentation. Yu Mi-rae proposed expanding the foundation operations into 3 additional cities, including Busan and Daegu and Gwangju. Go Dae-sung volunteered to handle the security infrastructure for the new regional offices through trusted former Marine contacts. On Thursday morning at 10:42, the phone vibrated with a call from an unknown Pangyo exchange number. The caller introduced himself as Min Dae-won from the office of a senior National Assembly member representing the Pangyo district. Min Dae-won was 47 years old and served as chief of staff to Assemblymember Cho Byung-ho of the ruling party. The chief of staff requested a meeting between Assemblymember Cho and the foundation leadership at the assembly office in Yeouido. Yu Mi-rae researched Assemblymember Cho Byung-ho immediately and identified 3 campaign donations from Shin Cheolwoo Group affiliates. The donations totaled 240 million won across the past 3 election cycles and appeared in public records. Taehyung accepted the meeting and scheduled it for Friday at 1500 at a public Yeouido coffee shop rather than the assembly office. Min Dae-won protested the venue change and eventually agreed under pressure from the foundation legal counsel and the public attention factor. Assemblymember Cho Byung-ho arrived at the Yeouido coffee shop at 15:04 on Friday with 2 aides and Min Dae-won. Cho Byung-ho was 63 years old and wore a dark blue suit and carried a leather portfolio bearing the assembly emblem. The assembly member opened with congratulations on the Forbes coverage and the foundation's expanding charitable footprint across Korea. Taehyung accepted the congratulations briefly and asked the assembly member to state the actual purpose of the requested meeting. Cho Byung-ho proposed legislative support for the foundation in exchange for board seats allocated to 2 political appointees. The assembly member added that legislative protection would shield the foundation from future tax investigations and regulatory pressure. Taehyung declined the proposal and stated that the foundation would not accept any board appointments under political influence. Cho Byung-ho closed the portfolio and warned that independence had limits in Korean civil society and political reality. The assembly member departed at 15:47 without finishing the iced Americano on the table beside the chair. Yu Mi-rae watched the convoy of 3 black sedans pull away from the curb and turned toward Taehyung carefully. The lawyer stated that Cho Byung-ho would now move to weaponize assembly oversight committees against the foundation operations directly. The mechanical voice noted at 16:08 that the contract had registered formal political opposition as a new threat category. The Assembly Oversight Committee summons arrived at the foundation office by registered mail at 11:23 on Wednesday morning. The summons required Yoon Taehyung to appear before the National Policy Committee on the following Tuesday at 1000. The hearing would examine charitable foundation operations exceeding 10 billion won in annual disbursements under new transparency provisions. Yu Mi-rae read the summons twice and confirmed that the transparency provisions had passed the assembly only 19 days earlier. Go Dae-sung researched the voting record on the new transparency provisions and identified the sponsoring legislator as Assemblymember Cho Byung-ho. The new law had passed with 12 hours of committee debate and had targeted foundations with exactly the Bareun Path profile. Yu Mi-rae filed a constitutional challenge to the law at 16:47 on Wednesday at the Constitutional Court of Korea. The challenge cited improper legislative targeting of a single private entity in violation of equal protection provisions under Article 11. The mechanical voice spoke at 17:34 and confirmed that political opposition had escalated through formal legislative weaponization mechanisms. The voice added that the contract remained operational and that the carrier should focus on intention rather than tactical defense alone. Taehyung asked the system whether scaling foundation operations rapidly would strengthen or weaken the legal defensive position. The voice replied that the rule operated on giving and that operational scale created its own forms of public protection. Taehyung authorized a 500 million won disbursement to the Seoul Metropolitan Hospital Pediatric Oncology Unit at 09:14 Thursday. The hospital director named Lee Hwa-jung accepted the disbursement and announced a public press conference at 1400 the same day. Lee Hwa-jung was 58 years old and had served as hospital director for 9 years through 3 administrative reorganizations. The director publicly thanked the Bareun Path Foundation and invited the Forbes Asia photographer to document the disbursement ceremony. Park Sun-young from Hung-kyoda published a parallel story at 6 a.m. Friday morning, detailing the assembly summons and the constitutional challenge. The Hung-kyoda story named Assemblymember Cho Byung-ho as the sponsor of the targeted transparency law and listed his campaign donors. The story reached 2 million digital readers by 11 o'clock Friday and triggered statements from 3 opposition party assembly members. 2 opposition members publicly demanded that Cho Byung-ho recuse himself from the upcoming oversight hearing on Tuesday. Cho Byung-ho refused recusal through his chief of staff Min Dae-won at a press briefing at 14:30 on Friday afternoon. Min Dae-won stated that the assembly member had no personal conflict of interest with the Bareun Path Charitable Foundation. The chief of staff added that the transparency law applied to all foundations meeting the threshold and not to any single entity. Park Sun-young published a follow-up story at 1814, listing 7 specific timing connections between the law and the foundation. On Saturday morning at 08:47, Margaret Chen called from Singapore and offered to attend the Tuesday hearing as international press. Forbes Asia would publish live coverage of the hearing across English-language channels, reaching financial centers globally. Taehyung accepted the offer, and Yoo Mi-rae prepared an additional briefing pack for the foreign press section of the Assembly chamber. The Mechanical Voice noted at 10:23 that international press presence would significantly raise the political cost of hostile committee actions. The Tuesday hearing began at 10 o'clock in the National Policy Committee chamber on the 3rd floor of the Assembly building. 11 committee members sat at the curved wooden bench facing 2 rows of witness chairs and a public gallery. Margaret Chen and Park Sun-young occupied seats in the foreign and domestic press sections with full credentials confirmed. Cho Byung-ho served as committee chair and opened the proceedings at 10:02 with a statement on foundation transparency. The chair called Taehyung as the first witness and administered the standard truth declaration under Assembly hearing procedures. Cho Byung-ho asked the witness to explain the source of the personal funds underlying the foundation's 18 billion won initial capitalization. Taehyung answered that the foundation had been capitalized through documented donations from over 4,000 individual contributors across Korea. The witness offered to provide the complete donor list under appropriate confidentiality provisions, protecting individual donor privacy rights. Cho Byung-ho pressed for the personal income source of the witness during the foundation's formation period, from March through May. Yoo Mi-rae intervened on the procedural ground that personal income inquiries fell outside the committee's stated jurisdiction. 3 opposition committee members supported the procedural objection and demanded a ruling from the committee's secretariat staff. The Secretariat ruled at 11:14 that personal income inquiries exceeded the scope of the Foundation transparency provisions. Cho Byung-ho changed direction and asked the witness about the relationship between the Foundation and Officer Lim Soo-jin. The question revealed that Cho Byung-ho had received confidential information about the sealed whistleblower filing from an internal Assembly source. Yoo Mi-rae raised an immediate point of order regarding improper disclosure of sealed court documents to committee members. The committee recessed at 11:47 for procedural review, and the press section erupted in coordinated note-taking and photography. During the recess, Park Sun-young approached Yoo Mi-rae and confirmed that the sealed filing leak had originated from within the Assembly. The reporter offered to investigate the leak source through her established sources in the Assembly Clerk's office. Yoo Mi-rae accepted the offer and provided a redacted timeline of the original sealed filing for verification reference. Margaret Chen filed her live coverage update at 12:08, and the Forbes Asia website published the breaking sealed filing leak story. The hearing resumed at 13:30 with a formal committee statement disclaiming any knowledge of the sealed filing contents. Cho Byung-ho withdrew the line of questioning regarding Officer Lim Soo-jin and moved to disbursement transparency questions instead. Taehyung answered the disbursement questions in detail, using a 57-page document submitted to the committee in advance. The hearing concluded at 17:42, with no adverse findings against the foundation, and 3 opposition members calling for ethics review. The ethics complaint against Assemblymember Cho Byung-ho entered the formal review process at 09:14 on Thursday morning. Park Sun-young published the names of 3 Assembly staff members suspected of leaking the sealed filing at 11:42 the same day. Cho Byung-ho responded through Min Dae-won with a denial of any personal knowledge regarding the sealed filing disclosure. The mechanical voice noted at 14:08 that the contract had registered a measurable weakening of the political opposition's offensive capacity. The foundation expansion into Busan and Daegu and Gwangju proceeded through October under Go Dae-sung's security infrastructure planning. Each regional office occupied a small commercial space, leased through verified local partners with documented community connections. Sora hired 3 regional directors, named Park Hyun-woo for Busan and Jung Mi-hee for Daegu and Lim Ji-hoon for Gwangju. The foundation balance reached 54 billion won by the end of October, across documented disbursements totaling 31 billion won. On the second Tuesday in November, Yoo Mi-rae called an emergency trustee meeting at 1900 in the Hongdae office. The lawyer presented documentation showing that Go Dae-sung had received 3 separate cash deposits totaling 140 million won. The deposits had arrived from a numbered account based in Singapore during the previous 2 weeks, under irregular conditions. Go Dae-sung sat motionless at the conference table, while the documentation passed from Yoo Mi-rae's hand to Taehyung's review. Taehyung asked Go Dae-sung directly to explain the source and the purpose of the 3 Singapore deposits. The retired Marine answered that the deposits represented payment for consulting services rendered to a private security firm. Go Dae-sung added that the consulting work had involved unrelated commercial matters, with no foundation connection whatsoever. Yoo Mi-rae produced bank metadata showing that the originating Singapore account traced through 4 shell companies to Shin Cheolwoo Group. Go Dae-sung's expression did not change while the bank metadata moved across the conference table screen at 19:23. The retired Marine asked whether the foundation considered him a traitor based on documents that he had not previously seen. Taehyung answered that the foundation needed a direct, truthful explanation before any conclusion could be reached on the matter. Go Dae-sung stood up and walked to the window facing the Hongdae Main Road, and stood with both hands behind the back. The retired Marine turned around and stated that the Singapore payments had been intended as leverage by Shin Cheolwoo against the foundation. Go Dae-sung added that the original consulting contract had appeared legitimate 3 weeks earlier through an introduction from a former colleague. The retired Marine had accepted the contract and the initial deposit before recognizing the connection to the Shin Cheolwoo Group network. Go Dae-sung had not reported the recognition to the foundation board out of personal shame and out of strategic miscalculation. Yoo Mi-rae asked Go Dae-sung whether any operational information had been provided to the Shin Cheolwoo Group during the period. The retired Marine answered that no operational information had been transmitted, and that the consulting work had focused on unrelated commercial security audits. Go Dae-sung offered immediate resignation from the foundation board and offered to return all 3 deposits through verified channels. The retired Marine added that any criminal investigation arising from the situation would proceed with full cooperation from the witness side. Taehyung asked the system whether the contract registered Go Dae-sung's actions as betrayal under the operational parameters. The mechanical voice replied that the contract operated solely on the carrier's outgoing intention and not on trustee conduct independently. The voice added that the carrier retained full discretion regarding personnel decisions affecting the foundation's operational structure going forward. Taehyung consulted Yoo Mi-rae for 9 minutes in a separate office before returning to the conference room at 2014. The carrier accepted the resignation and required the return of all 3 Singapore deposits through proper documentation. Go Dae-sung would remain available as a witness for any related criminal proceedings against the Shin Cheolwoo Group structure. The retired Marine agreed to all conditions and signed the resignation documents and the cooperation agreement at 20:31 on Tuesday evening. Go Dae-sung walked out of the Hongdae office at 20:43, carrying a single cardboard box containing personal effects from the workstation. Yoo Mi-rae proposed Park Hyun-woo from the Busan regional office as the replacement trustee with security infrastructure responsibilities. Park Hyun-woo was 38 years old and had served 11 years in the Korean Coast Guard before joining the foundation. The new trustee accepted the role by video call at 21:14 and confirmed availability for Seoul travel within 48 hours. The mechanical voice noted at 21:47 that the contract had registered a successful trust restructuring under hostile pressure conditions. On Wednesday morning at 08:23, Park Sun-young called Taehyung directly and reported a tip from her assembly source. The reporter stated that Cho Byung-ho was preparing a televised press conference announcing personal corruption charges against the foundation leadership. The press conference was scheduled for 1600 on Thursday at the Press Center building near Gwanghwamun Square in downtown Seoul. Park Sun-young asked whether the foundation wished to prepare a coordinated public response timed for immediate post-conference release. Yoo Mi-rae accepted the offer, and the foundation legal team began preparing detailed rebuttal documentation through Wednesday afternoon and evening. The rebuttal package included the original Go Dae-sung situation documentation, properly redacted to protect ongoing criminal investigation procedures. The package also included the constitutional challenge filing and the sealed filing leak investigation status from the Assembly Ethics Committee. Margaret Chen confirmed Forbes Asia attendance at the Thursday press conference with live coverage prepared in 3 languages. At 22:47 on Wednesday evening, the Foundation security team detected unauthorized network access attempts from 3 separate external IP addresses. The IP addresses traced to commercial data centers in Singapore and Hong Kong and Vladivostok through standard digital forensics analysis. Yoo Mi-rae filed an emergency cybercrime complaint with the Korean National Police Agency Cybercrime Unit at 23:14 that night. The Bareun Path Charitable Foundation entered Thursday morning under simultaneous political and cyber attack from multiple coordinated hostile parties. The Korean National Police Agency Cybercrime Unit dispatched 2 technicians to the Hongdae Foundation office at 02:14 on Thursday morning. The lead technician, named Bae-sun-woo, identified the attack vector as a coordinated credential harvesting attempt targeting trustee email accounts. Bae-sun-woo was 31 years old and had served 6 years in military cyber operations before joining the police unit. The attack had failed to penetrate the Foundation's main systems due to 2-factor authentication implemented during the September security audit. The cybercrime unit traced the Vladivostok IP address to a contractor previously employed by Shin Cheolwoo Group affiliates in Russia. The contractor, named Kirill, operated under a documented Hong Kong shell corporation linked to the same network identified earlier. Bae-sun-woo completed the preliminary forensic report at 05:47 on Thursday morning and forwarded it to Yoo Mi-rae directly. The mechanical voice noted at 06:14 that the contract had registered the cyber attack as an escalation toward asymmetric warfare tactics. Cho Byung-ho arrived at the Press Center building near Gwanghwamun Square at 15:42 on Thursday for the 1600 conference. The assembly member entered the conference room with Min Dae-won and 3 senior staff carrying prepared statements and binder documents. Margaret Chen and Park Sun-young occupied seats in the front row, alongside 34 other domestic and international press representatives. Taehyung watched the conference broadcast from the Hongdae office on a 40-inch screen mounted in the main conference room. Cho Byung-ho opened the conference at 16:03 with a statement alleging Foundation Board corruption through Singapore-based payment channels. The assembly member named Go Dae-sung specifically and produced documents matching the same metadata identified by Yoo Mi-rae 3 days earlier. Cho Byung-ho extended the corruption allegation to the entire foundation board and demanded immediate suspension of all operations pending investigation. The assembly member concluded the prepared statement at 16:18 and opened the floor for press questions from credentialed attendees. Park Sun-young raised her hand and asked Cho Byung-ho about the source of the Singapore payment documentation presented at the conference. The Han-Kyoto reporter added a follow-up question regarding the timing connection between the press conference and the cyber attack overnight. Cho Byung-ho deflected both questions and stated that the documentation had arrived through anonymous sources concerned about foundation integrity. Margaret Chen asked the next question and presented Cho Byung-ho with the foundation's prepared rebuttal package containing the Go Daesung resignation documents. The Forbes Asia editor read aloud the relevant portions of the resignation agreement signed by Go Daesung on Tuesday evening. Margaret Chen added that the foundation had identified and acted on the Singapore payment situation 72 hours before the press conference. Cho Byung-ho fell silent for 9 seconds and consulted with Min Dae-won at the side of the speaker podium quietly. The assembly member returned to the microphone and stated that the press conference would continue with additional documentation review. A reporter from the Chosun Ilbo asked Cho Byung-ho directly about the cyber attack against the foundation overnight. The reporter cited preliminary forensic findings traced to a Russian contractor with documented ties to the Shin Cheolwoo Group network. Cho Byung-ho denied any knowledge of any cyber operations and stated that the question fell outside the conference scope. The conference concluded at 17:09, with the assembly member departing through a side exit, avoiding the main press gathering area. The foundation released the prepared rebuttal package at 17:14 through coordinated distribution to 14 domestic news outlets simultaneously. Margaret Chen filed her Forbes Asia coverage at 17:31 with the headline, "Assembly Member Confronted at Own Press Conference," in English. Park Sun-young published the Han-Kyoto follow-up at 18:42, detailing the cyber attack and the corruption documentation timing connections. The Bareun Path Charitable Foundation received 612 new donor inquiries between 1800 and midnight on Thursday evening. On Friday morning at 08:14, Officer Lim Soo-jin called Taehyung from a secure line at the Financial Intelligence Office. The officer reported that the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office had opened a formal corruption investigation against Cho Byung-ho. The investigation would examine the press conference documentation source and the cyber attack timing under organized crime statutes. Lim Soo-jin added that the Deputy Commissioner Hwang In-shik remained under separate ethics review without active duty status. Yu Mi-dae filed an amended civil damages claim at 11:23 on Friday morning at the Seoul Central District Court. The amended claim increased the damages request from 500 million won to 20 billion won, including the cyber attack damages. The amended claim named the Shin Cheolwoo Group and 3 additional corporate entities identified through the Vladivostok contractor trace. Judge Kang accepted the amended filing at 14:47 and scheduled the next hearing for the following Wednesday at 10:00. The mechanical voice spoke at 16:08 on Friday and registered the foundation as transitioning from defensive to offensive operational posture. The voice added that the contract continued to operate within original parameters, regardless of the strategic positioning of foundation operations. Taehyung authorized a 3 billion won disbursement to flood reconstruction in 3 southern coastal villages at 17:22 on Friday afternoon. The multiplier returns from the disbursement reached 32 billion won by Saturday evening across 2,400 separate transactions. On Saturday morning at 09:47, Park Hyun-woo arrived from Busan and assumed formal duties as the new security trustee. The former Coast Guard officer immediately commissioned a comprehensive security audit of all 4 foundation offices through certified contractors. Park Hyun-woo identified 17 specific vulnerabilities across physical and digital security infrastructure during the first day of the audit process. The new trustee scheduled remediation work to begin on Monday morning across all 4 foundation regional locations simultaneously. At 22:31 on Saturday evening, Taehyung received an encrypted message through the Foundation's secure communication channel from an anonymous source. The message stated that Shin Cheolwoo would attend a private dinner at a Cheongdam restaurant on Sunday evening at 1900. The message identified the restaurant and provided the names of 2 confirmed attendees, including a senior Samsung financial executive. The mechanical voice noted at 22:47 that the contract had registered the anonymous tip as actionable strategic intelligence. Park Hyun-woo evaluated the anonymous tip for 94 minutes before presenting tactical options to Taehyung at 0:23 on Sunday. The security trustee identified 3 operational paths, including direct observation and document collection, and full strategic intervention. Yoo Mi-rae joined the call from her Yangchun apartment and rejected direct intervention as legally indefensible under any scenario. The lawyer proposed coordinated documentation through a licensed private investigator working under attorney-client privilege protection. The licensed private investigator named Han Ji-yu accepted the assignment at 09:14 on Sunday morning through Yoo Mi-rae's office. Han Ji-yu was 44 years old and had served 15 years in the Seoul Prosecutor's Office Investigation Division before retirement. The investigator deployed 2 assistants to the Cheongdam restaurant location at 17:30 with appropriate documentation equipment and credentials. Park Hyun-woo coordinated with Han Ji-yu through encrypted communication while maintaining operational separation from the Foundation legal team. Shin Cheolwoo arrived at the Cheongdam restaurant at 19:04 on Sunday evening in a black Mercedes with 2 security personnel. The senior Samsung financial executive named Yoon Dae-ho arrived independently at 19:11 in a separate Mercedes from the Hanam direction. Yoon Dae-ho was 59 years old and served as head of strategic investment portfolio at the Samsung Financial Group. Han Ji-yu documented both arrivals through standard photographic procedures and confirmed the meeting attendees through publicly verifiable identification methods. The Cheongdam restaurant private dining room hosted 7 additional attendees who arrived between 1914 and 1931 on Sunday evening. The 7 attendees included 3 private equity executives and 2 assembly staff members, and 2 unidentified individuals in business attire. Han Ji-yu's assistants confirmed all identities through documented credential verification within the public restaurant approach areas only. The meeting concluded at 22:47, and Han Ji-yu prepared the preliminary documentation report by 2:14 on Monday morning. The mechanical voice spoke at 3:08 on Monday and confirmed that the intelligence collection had remained within contract parameters. The voice noted that the carrier had not personally directed any intervention and had not violated any operational boundaries through observation. Taehyung reviewed the Han Ji-yu documentation report at 06:47 on Monday morning over coffee at the Hongdae office. The report identified the meeting as a coordination session for combined regulatory pressure against the Foundation through multiple institutional channels. Yoo Mi-rae filed a formal complaint with the Financial Services Commission at 10:14 on Monday, based on the meeting documentation. The complaint cited potential coordinated market manipulation through institutional financial channels, targeting the Foundation's banking relationships in coming weeks. The Financial Services Commission acknowledged receipt at 11:47 and assigned the complaint to the Institutional Oversight Division for review. The Commission requested formal interviews with all named meeting attendees within 14 business days under standard regulatory procedures. Park Sun-young published the Cheongdam meeting documentation at 17:31 on Monday evening through Hankura as exclusive coverage. The story named all confirmed attendees and detailed the institutional coordination pattern visible through the meeting structure and timing. Yoon Dae-ho's name and Samsung Financial Group affiliation triggered immediate market reaction in the Kospi futures trading on Tuesday morning. The Samsung Financial Group stock dropped 3.8% at market open, and Yoon Dae-ho announced personal administrative leave by 11:23. On Tuesday afternoon at 14:42, Margaret Chen called from Singapore with significant international press developments. Forbes Asia would publish a follow-up cover story on the Bareun Path Charitable Foundation operations for the December edition. The follow-up story would feature the political opposition pattern and the institutional coordination evidence collected through Han Ji-yu's documentation. Margaret Chen added that the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times had requested cooperation on parallel English language coverage. The Wednesday court hearing on the amended civil damages claim proceeded at 10:00 at the Seoul Central District Court. Judge Kang accepted the amended damages request and ordered the Shin Cheolwoo Group to respond within 15 business days. The judge added that the cyber attack evidence would proceed under separate criminal jurisdiction through the Cybercrime Prosecution Division. Yang Chezik requested a 30-day extension for the response, and Judge Kang denied the extension request at 11:47. Outside the courthouse, Yang Chezik approached Yu Mi-dae directly on the marble steps facing the Socho Road traffic. The senior litigator stated that his client wished to explore a comprehensive private settlement covering all pending claims and counterclaims. Yu Mi-dae responded that any settlement discussion would require full Shin Cheolwoo Group financial disclosure under court supervision conditions. Yang Chezik declined the disclosure condition and walked away toward the parking garage without further conversation at 12:14. The Mechanical Voice spoke at 12:47 on Wednesday and noted that hostile parties had reached strategic exhaustion through repeated tactical failures. The Voice added that the contract had registered the situation as approaching decisive transition under operational pressure dynamics. Taehyung authorized a 5 billion won disbursement to medical research at 3 Seoul University hospitals at 14:31 on Wednesday. The multiplier returns from the disbursement reached 54 billion won by Friday evening across 4,700 transactions. On Thursday morning at 09:14, a senior official from the Blue House Economic Policy Office requested a meeting with Taehyung. The official named Yang In-ho served as senior economic advisor to the president and operated through the Presidential Office of Public Affairs. Yang In-ho was 67 years old and had served 3 consecutive administrations across the past 12 years in similar advisory capacities. The meeting was scheduled for Friday at 11:00 at a private conference facility in Samcheong near the Presidential Office Complex. Taehyung consulted Yu Mi-dae and Park Hyun-woo and decided to attend the Blue House requested meeting under specific operational conditions. The conditions included presence of Foundation legal counsel and documented agenda submitted 24 hours in advance of the meeting. Yang In-ho's office accepted both conditions and provided a written agenda focused on charitable sector regulatory framework discussions. The Mechanical Voice noted at 17:08 on Thursday that the contract had registered the highest level political engagement to date. The Samcheong private conference facility entrance opened directly onto a narrow stone-paved alley near the presidential complex. Yang In-ho stood at the entrance at 10:54 on Friday and greeted the foundation delegation with a brief formal bow. The senior advisor wore a charcoal suit and a navy tie and carried no visible briefcase or documents under either arm. 2 assistants in matching gray suits escorted Taehyung and Yu Mi-dae and Park Hyun-woo through 3 security checkpoints to the second-floor conference room. The conference room contained a long teak table and 8 leather chairs, and 1 window facing a small interior courtyard. Yang In-ho gestured toward the 3 chairs along one side of the table and took the opposite center position alone. The senior advisor opened at 11:02 with a statement about the presidential administration's interest in stable charitable sector operations. Yang In-ho added that the recent political turbulence around the Bareun Path Charitable Foundation had reached presidential office attention level. Taehyung asked the senior advisor to specify the presidential office concerns regarding the foundation's current operational status. Yang In-ho answered that the concerns included international press coverage and Kospi market volatility and ongoing criminal investigations involving assembly members. The senior advisor proposed a comprehensive resolution framework that would address all pending matters through coordinated administrative action. Yu Mirei requested specific written details of the proposed resolution framework before any substantive discussion could proceed further. Yang In-ho produced a single-page document from an inner suit pocket and slid it across the teak table toward Yu Mirei. The document outlined a proposed structure in which the foundation would accept regulatory oversight from a presidential commission. The presidential commission would include 3 members appointed by the Blue House and 2 members selected by the foundation board. The document added that the regulatory framework would shield the foundation from political opposition through formal administrative protection mechanisms. Yu Mirei read the document twice and passed it to Taehyung at 11:23, without offering any verbal response. Taehyung read the document once and asked Yang In-ho whether the proposed commission would have approval authority over foundation disbursements. Yang In-ho answered that the commission would have advisory authority on disbursements exceeding 1 billion won per individual transaction. The senior advisor added that the advisory authority would protect the foundation from any future regulatory challenges across all jurisdictions. The mechanical voice spoke at 11:34 and noted that the proposed structure would compromise the carrier's operational intention parameters. The voice added that political appointees holding advisory authority would inevitably distort the giving rule through indirect institutional pressure mechanisms. Taehyung asked Yang In-ho whether the presidential office would accept any modified version of the proposed framework structure. The senior advisor answered that the framework had been approved at the highest level and that modifications were not available. Taehyung declined the proposed framework at 11:47 and stated that the foundation would continue under its current independent trustee structure. Yang In-ho closed the document folder and warned that independence carried costs that would extend beyond previous opposition party actions. The senior advisor added that the presidential office could not guarantee protection from administrative reviews initiated through standard regulatory channels. The meeting concluded at 11:52, and the foundation delegation departed through the same security checkpoints in reverse sequence. Outside the Samcheong facility, Yu Mirei stopped on the stone alley and turned toward Taehyung with a careful expression. The lawyer asked whether the carrier understood the operational implications of refusing a direct presidential office framework proposal. Taehyung answered that the foundation could not operate under any structure that compromised the contract's intention parameters. The mechanical voice noted at 12:14 that the carrier had transitioned to the highest level of strategic independence available. On Saturday morning at 07:23, the National Tax Service announced a comprehensive audit of the Bareun Path Charitable Foundation operations. The audit would examine all foundation transactions from the registration date through the current operational period over 5 months. Park Sun-young published the audit announcement at 09:47, alongside a detailed timeline of the Blue House meeting from Friday. The Hankyoda story named Yang In-ho specifically and detailed the framework proposal and the foundation's documented refusal under independent trustee authority. The mechanical voice spoke at 11:08 on Saturday and registered the tax audit as predicted retaliation through standard regulatory channels. The voice added that the foundation's documentation infrastructure should support full audit cooperation without operational compromise to the contract parameters. Yu Mirei confirmed at 13:14 that all foundation documentation systems would support comprehensive audit response within standard regulatory timelines. Park Hyun-woo coordinated additional security measures for the audit response team operations across all 4 regional foundation offices. On Monday morning at 10:42, the National Tax Service audit team arrived at the Hongdae Foundation office with 7 personnel. The lead auditor, named Choi Jae-won, was 47 years old and had served 16 years in foundation taxation review. Choi Jae-won requested complete access to foundation documentation and operational systems for the comprehensive audit period scope. Yu Mirei provided full access at 11:14 and assigned 3 foundation staff members to support the audit response operations. The audit team worked continuously through Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, examining foundation operations across all 4 regional office locations. Choi Jae-won conducted personal interviews with all 3 trustees and 12 senior staff members during the 3-day initial period. The audit team identified 0 irregularities in foundation operations and 0 documentation gaps across the comprehensive review scope. Choi Jae-won issued a preliminary audit clearance at 16:47 on Wednesday afternoon through standard National Tax Service procedural channels. The Mechanical Voice spoke at 17:08 on Wednesday and registered the audit clearance as a decisive defeat of standard regulatory retaliation tactics. The Voice added that hostile parties had now exhausted all available institutional pressure mechanisms against the foundation operational structure. Taehyung authorized a 10 billion won disbursement to winter heating assistance across 47 cities at 1823 on Wednesday. The multiplier returns from the disbursement reached 110 billion won by Friday evening across 9,400 transactions. The shooting at the Daegu Regional Foundation office occurred at 22:47 on Friday evening during routine closing operations. 2 masked individuals approached the front entrance and fired 4 rounds through the glass door before fleeing on a motorcycle. Jung Mi-hee was inside the office, completing weekly reports, and survived the attack by taking cover behind a steel filing cabinet. The Daegu police responded within 7 minutes, and the foundation security team mobilized through Park Hyun-woo's emergency communication protocol at 22:54. Park Hyun-woo dispatched additional security personnel to all 4 regional offices by 23:31 on Friday under emergency operational status. The security trustee coordinated with the Daegu police investigation team and provided ballistic evidence collection support through certified contractors. The lead Daegu detective named Bae Young-chol identified the firearm caliber and the motorcycle model through preliminary forensic analysis. The Mechanical Voice spoke at 0:14 on Saturday and registered the attack as transition to open kinetic warfare against the carrier's operations. Taehyung arrived at the Daegu office at 06:23 on Saturday morning via the first KTX train from Seoul Station. Jung Mi-hee remained on site through the night and met the carrier at the secured entrance with Foundation legal counsel present. The regional director showed visible signs of exhaustion, but provided a complete operational status report within 14 minutes. Taehyung confirmed full medical and psychological support resources and authorized immediate office relocation to a more defensible location. Park Sun-young published the Daegu attack coverage at 09:14 on Saturday morning through Hangkyora with full forensic details. The story named the foundation as the target and referenced the pattern of escalating hostile actions across the past 6 months. International press coverage from Forbes Asia and the Wall Street Journal appeared within 2 hours of the Hangkyora initial story. Margaret Chen filed an emergency Forbes Asia editorial at 11:42, calling for international financial sanctions against the Shin Cheolwoo Group. The Mechanical Voice spoke at 13:08 on Saturday and confirmed that the kinetic attack would generate accelerated multiplier returns through public response. The Voice added that the carrier's defensive infrastructure investments would now produce measurable strategic returns under the contract operational parameters. Taehyung authorized a 15 billion won disbursement to victims of violent crime support programs at 14:47 on Saturday afternoon. The multiplier returns from the disbursement reached 160 billion won by Sunday evening across 13,000 transactions. Officer Lim Soo-jin called at 08:14 on Sunday morning with significant criminal investigation developments. The Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office had obtained arrest warrants for Shin Cheolwoo and 4 senior Shin Cheolwoo Group executives. The warrants covered organized crime statutes and arson and cyber attacks and the Daegu shooting under coordinated criminal conspiracy charges. Lim Soo-jin added that the arrest operations would proceed at 0600 on Monday morning across 7 locations in Seoul and Pangyo. The arrest operations proceeded on Monday morning under coordinated police deployment across the 7 identified locations simultaneously. Shin Cheolwoo was arrested at his Cheongdam residence at 0614 on Monday morning by senior detectives from the Organized Crime Division. The 4 senior executives were arrested at residences in Pangyo and Hanam and Socho and Bundang within 14 minutes. The Korean financial markets opened on Monday morning with Shin Cheolwoo Group affiliated stocks suspended pending criminal proceedings review. Young Jessic appeared at the Seoul Central District Court at 10:42 on Monday morning to file emergency bail applications. Judge Kang denied all 5 bail applications at 14:31, citing flight risk and organized crime statute restrictions on pretrial release. The senior litigator filed appeals to the Seoul High Court at 15:47 on Monday afternoon under expedited review procedures. The Seoul High Court denied all 5 appeals at 11:23 on Tuesday morning through a 3-judge panel review process. Cho Byung-ho announced resignation from the National Assembly at 16:14 on Tuesday afternoon through a brief written statement. The assembly member cited personal health reasons and made no reference to the ongoing corruption investigation or the foundation case. The Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office added Cho Byung-ho to the criminal investigation scope at 18:42 on Tuesday evening. Park Sun-young published the resignation coverage at 1931 with detailed analysis of the political collapse pattern across the past 3 months. On Wednesday morning at 09:14, Yang In-ho's office issued a statement clarifying the Blue House position regarding the foundation. The statement disclaimed any institutional support for the Shin Cheolwoo Group and affirmed presidential office commitment to charitable sector independence. The statement made no reference to the Friday meeting at the Samcheong facility or the proposed regulatory framework structure. Yoo Mi-rae filed the meeting documentation through court protective filing at 11:47 on Wednesday morning for evidentiary preservation purposes. The mechanical voice spoke at 14:23 on Wednesday and registered the political restructuring as complete defeat of hostile institutional opposition. The voice added that the foundation had transitioned to the dominant strategic position across all measurable operational dimensions and parameters. Taehyung authorized a 20 billion won disbursement to long-term homeless rehabilitation programs across all 8 Korean provinces simultaneously. The multiplier returns from the disbursement reached 220 billion won by Friday evening across 17,000 transactions. On Thursday afternoon at 15:42, Park Hyun-woo presented additional security intelligence regarding remaining hostile parties' operational status. The security trustee identified 3 independent contractors potentially still active under prior Shin Cheolwoo Group operational instructions. Park Hyun-woo coordinated with the Korean National Police Agency to track and apprehend the 3 contractors over the following 72 hours. All 3 contractors were arrested between Friday evening and Sunday morning across separate locations in Incheon and Suwon and Daejeon. The foundation balance reached 812 billion won by Sunday evening through accumulated multiplier returns over the operational period. Yoo Mi-rae proposed restructuring the foundation into a permanent institutional framework capable of operating beyond the carrier's individual lifetime. The lawyer presented a draft framework at 19:23 on Sunday evening for trustee review across the following operational week. The mechanical voice spoke at 21:08 on Sunday and noted that institutional permanence remained subject to specific contract parameters going forward. The trustee meeting on Monday morning at 0900 examined Yoo Mi-rae's proposed permanent institutional framework in detailed operational terms. Park Hyun-woo opened the discussion with security infrastructure requirements for an institution operating beyond the carrier's individual operational period. The proposed framework would establish a perpetual charitable trust governed by a rotating board of 9 independent trustees. The trust would operate under Korean Civil Code provisions and would maintain financial reserves capable of sustaining operations indefinitely. Yoo Mi-rae presented the legal structure documentation across 347 pages, covering all governance and operational parameters. The framework included specific provisions for trustee selection and removal, and conflict of interest management across all institutional decisions. Taehyung asked the system whether transitioning to permanent institutional structure would maintain the contract's operational parameters going forward. The mechanical voice answered at 11:47 that the contract operated on the carrier's intention and not on institutional structures independently. The voice added that institutional permanence would continue producing multiplier returns through the carrier's continued giving intention during the active operational period. The voice further noted that the contract would conclude with the carrier's natural lifespan and would not transfer to institutional successors. Taehyung accepted the operational limitation and authorized Yoo Mi-rae to proceed with permanent framework registration through proper legal channels. The lawyer filed the initial registration documents at the Seoul Central District Court at 14:23 on Monday afternoon. The Shin Cheolwoo criminal trial began on Tuesday morning at 10:00 at the Seoul Central District Court in Courtroom 7. The presiding judge named Im Sung-ho assigned the case after Judge Kang recused himself due to civil proceeding overlap concerns. Im Sung-ho was 56 years old and had served 22 years in criminal division covering organized crime and financial crimes. The trial would address 11 separate criminal charges across all 5 defendants, under coordinated prosecution by 3 senior prosecutors. The lead prosecutor, named Kim Dae-hyun, opened the prosecution case with a documented 6-month pattern of escalating hostile actions. Kim Dae-hyun was 43 years old and had served 14 years in the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office. The prosecutor presented the cyber attack evidence and the arson forensic evidence and the Daegu shooting ballistic evidence systematically. Yang Jae-sik objected to several evidentiary submissions, and Judge Im sustained 2 objections while overruling 7 others through structured procedural ruling. The first day of trial concluded at 17:42, with the prosecution presenting comprehensive documentary evidence across all 11 criminal charges. Park Sun-young covered the trial proceedings extensively through Hankyoreh, with detailed daily reporting on prosecution and defense arguments. Margaret Chen attended the trial proceedings personally, with Forbes Asia coverage extending across the 17-day trial schedule period. International press attention reached unprecedented levels, with 23 international outlets providing continuous trial coverage in 14 languages globally. On Wednesday afternoon at 14:31, Officer Lim Soo-jin called Taehyung with additional investigation development information. The Financial Intelligence Unit had completed forensic analysis of the Shin Cheolwoo Group's 11-year operational pattern across multiple victims. The analysis identified 47 previous targets who had lost assets through similar civil preservation and pressure tactics over the period. Lim Soo-jin added that the foundation could potentially recover assets for the 47 previous victims through coordinated civil proceedings. Yoo Mi-rae initiated contact with all 47 previous victims through legal channels over the following 10 operational days. 23 previous victims accepted Foundation legal representation under contingency arrangements for asset recovery through civil proceedings. The remaining 24 victims either declined representation or had passed away or had emigrated outside Korean jurisdiction. The Foundation filed coordinated civil recovery actions for the 23 accepting victims at 14:47 on the following Monday afternoon. The mechanical voice spoke at 16:08 on the following Tuesday and confirmed that asset recovery operations remained within contract parameters. The voice added that recovered assets transferring to previous victims would not affect the carrier's multiplier returns through the contract mechanism. Taehyung authorized the Foundation to absorb all legal costs for the 23 previous victim cases without recovery contingencies. The legal cost commitment totaled approximately 4 billion won across the coordinated civil recovery proceedings over the projected timeline. On Thursday morning at 09:14, Margaret Chen called with significant international development information regarding the foundation operations. The United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees had requested formal partnership discussions with the Bareun Path Charitable Foundation. The partnership would involve foundation participation in international humanitarian operations across 3 regional UN refugee program areas. Margaret Chen added that 2 additional international organizations had submitted similar partnership inquiries through diplomatic channels over the preceding week. Taehyung consulted Yoo Mi-rae and Park Hyun-woo and accepted the UN partnership inquiry under standard foundation operational protocols. The lawyer scheduled formal partnership discussions for the following month with UN representatives at the Seoul Foreign Press Center. The foundation operations now extended into international humanitarian dimensions, beyond the original Korean domestic charitable scope and mission. The Mechanical Voice spoke at 17:23 on Thursday and noted that international expansion represented natural evolution under sustained operational success. The Shin Cheolwoo criminal trial verdict arrived on the 17th day at 14:47 on a Thursday afternoon in late January. Judge Im Sung-ho ruled guilty on all 11 criminal charges across all 5 defendants under organized crime prosecution statutes. Shin Cheolwoo received a 27-year prison sentence and 4 billion won in personal financial penalties under the verdict. The 4 senior executives received prison sentences between 14 and 21 years, with substantial financial penalties under coordinated rulings. Young Jae-sik announced appeals on all 5 verdicts at 16:14 on Thursday afternoon through standard procedural channels. The Seoul High Court would review the appeals over the following operational period under expedited high-profile case scheduling priorities. The Shin Cheolwoo Group corporate structure entered receivership proceedings at 09:23 on Friday morning through the Seoul Bankruptcy Court. The Mechanical Voice spoke at 11:47 on Friday and registered the criminal proceedings as complete strategic victory across the operational period. The Seoul Detention Center visitor request arrived at the foundation office at 11:23 on Tuesday morning in mid-February. Shin Cheolwoo had submitted a formal request to meet Yun Taehyung through standard detention facility administrative procedures. Yoo Mi-rae reviewed the request twice and recommended consultation with Officer Lim Soo-jin regarding any investigative implications first. The Mechanical Voice spoke at 13:08 and noted that the meeting fell within carrier discretion under the contract operational parameters. Officer Lim Soo-jin confirmed at 15:47 that the meeting would not affect ongoing criminal proceedings or appellate review processes. The officer added that the prosecution would receive a transcript of any conversation under standard detention facility recording protocols. Taehyung accepted the meeting request and scheduled the visit for Thursday at 1400 at the Seoul Detention Center facility. Park Hyun-woo coordinated security arrangements for the foundation delegation, including legal counsel presence throughout the visit period. The Seoul Detention Center processing area smelled of industrial disinfectant and stale air recycled through institutional ventilation systems. Taehyung passed through 3 security checkpoints at 13:42 on Thursday afternoon, with Yoo Mi-rae accompanying as legal counsel. The meeting room contained a single steel table bolted to the floor and 4 metal chairs and 1 observation window. Shin Cheolwoo entered at 1400, wearing standard detention facility uniform, and sat down across the table without verbal greeting. The former private equity head appeared thinner than during the Yeouido coffee shop meeting 9 months earlier in the year. Shin Cheolwoo opened at 14:02 with a statement requesting the meeting to discuss matters beyond the formal court proceedings. Taehyung asked the former private equity head to specify the actual purpose of the requested meeting in operational terms. Shin Cheolwoo answered that he wished to understand the actual mechanism underlying the foundation's continuous financial performance. Taehyung explained that the foundation operated under a documented charitable mechanism that produced multiplier returns through genuine giving intention. Shin Cheolwoo asked whether the mechanism could operate for any individual willing to follow the documented operational parameters. The mechanical voice spoke immediately at 14:11 and confirmed that disclosure of carrier-specific parameters fell outside contract permissions. Taehyung answered that the mechanism remained bound to the original carrier and could not transfer to any other individual. Shin Cheolwoo accepted the answer without visible reaction and shifted to a different line of inquiry about foundation operations. The former private equity head asked whether the foundation would consider absorbing the receivership remnants of his original corporate structure. Yu Mi-rae intervened on procedural grounds and stated that any corporate absorption would require coordination through the bankruptcy court proceedings. Shin Cheolwoo accepted the procedural answer and made a final statement before the meeting concluded at 14:31. The former private equity head stated that the original strategic approach had failed due to fundamental misjudgment of the foundation's operational nature. Shin Cheolwoo added that prior 11 victims had operated through conventional financial mechanisms vulnerable to standard pressure tactics easily. The carrier had operated through a mechanism fundamentally incompatible with conventional pressure tactics across all operational dimensions and timescales. Taehyung accepted the statement without comment and departed the meeting room through the same security checkpoints in reverse order. Outside the Seoul detention center, Yu Mi-rae stopped on the entrance plaza and turned toward Taehyung carefully. The lawyer asked whether the meeting had produced any operational intelligence beyond the formal courtroom proceedings already completed. Taehyung answered that the meeting had confirmed the strategic completion of the hostile party operational period across all dimensions. The mechanical voice spoke at 15:47 and registered the meeting as formal closure of the primary external threat operational period. On Friday morning at 09:14, Park Hyun-woo presented the comprehensive security assessment for the foundation's permanent operational period. The security trustee identified no remaining active hostile parties across the comprehensive intelligence assessment scope from all available sources. The assessment confirmed that the Shin Cheolwoo Group operational network had completely dissolved through criminal proceedings and receivership coordination. Park Hyun-woo recommended transition to standard institutional security protocols at all 4 Foundation regional office locations going forward. The UN partnership formal agreement signing proceeded at the Seoul Foreign Press Center at 1100 on Monday morning. The UN regional director named Andre Mboto signed on behalf of the High Commissioner for Refugees Regional Operations Office. Taehyung signed on behalf of the Bareun Path Charitable Foundation under proper trustee authorization documentation completed previously. Margaret Chen covered the signing ceremony through Forbes Asia, with parallel coverage from 12 international press outlets present. The UN partnership would commit the foundation to 50 billion won annual contribution toward 3 regional refugee program operational areas. The foundation would also provide operational expertise through trustee participation in UN regional advisory committees over the partnership period. The mechanical voice spoke at 14:23 on Monday and confirmed that international partnership represented natural evolution under sustained operational parameters. Taehyung authorized the first 50 billion won partnership contribution disbursement at 16:47 on Monday afternoon through standard transfer procedures. The multiplier returns from the UN partnership contribution reached 550 billion won by Thursday evening across 47,000 transactions. The foundation balance reached 1,340 billion won by Friday evening under comprehensive operational accounting. Yu Mi-rae completed the permanent institutional framework registration at 17:23 on Friday afternoon through the Seoul Central District Court. The Bareun Path Charitable Foundation existed as a permanent perpetual charitable trust under Korean Civil Code provisions going forward. On Saturday morning at 0847, Park Sun-young published a comprehensive analytical feature on the foundation's 12-month operational transformation. The Hankura feature spanned 24 pages and detailed the complete strategic and operational and institutional evolution across the year. Margaret Chen published a parallel Forbes Asia retrospective at 1114, reaching 17 million print and digital readers globally. The Mechanical Voice spoke at 1408 on Saturday and registered the operational period as approaching natural transition to sustained equilibrium. The new foundation headquarters opened on the first Monday of March in a renovated 6-story building near Hongik University Station. The building had been purchased outright by the Permanent Charitable Trust for 84 billion won through proper documentation. Sora coordinated the operational transition from the previous Hongdae office location across the preceding 2 operational weeks. The new headquarters housed 347 full-time staff across operations and legal and security and international partnership divisions. Taehyung walked through the new headquarters entrance at 0847 on the opening Monday morning, carrying a single leather briefcase. The reception staff greeted the carrier with formal bows, and the security officers conducted standard credential verification at the entrance. The carrier proceeded to the executive floor on the 5th level, where Yoo-mi-dae and Park Hyun-woo waited in the main conference room. The opening day operational meeting commenced at 0900 sharp, with comprehensive status updates across all foundation operational divisions. Yoo-mi-dae reported that the Permanent Charitable Trust Framework had received final court certification on the previous Friday afternoon. The trust would operate under perpetual governance through the 9-member rotating trustee board across all future operational periods. Park Hyun-woo confirmed that all 4 regional offices had transitioned to standard institutional security protocols without any operational incidents. The foundation balance stood at 1,420 billion won as of the close of business on Friday evening. The Mechanical Voice spoke at 10:14 on Monday morning during a brief, solitary moment in the executive office space. The Voice noted that the carrier had reached operational equilibrium under the contract parameters across all measurable strategic dimensions. The Voice added that the contract would continue producing multiplier returns through sustained, genuine giving intention across the carrier's remaining lifespan. Taehyung acknowledged the operational status and confirmed continued commitment to the original giving intention parameters, going forward indefinitely. At 11:47 on Monday, Park Sun-young arrived for a previously scheduled interview regarding the permanent foundation transition. The Hankura reporter wore the same gray cardigan from the original Sinchon Cafe meeting nearly 13 months earlier. Park Sun-young opened with a question about the carrier's personal reflection on the operational transformation across the past year. Taehyung answered that the foundation had succeeded through proper trustee structure and sustained giving intention across the operational period. The reporter asked the carrier about future operational plans for the permanent foundation structure beyond the current period. Taehyung answered that the foundation would expand international partnerships and increase domestic disbursement coverage across all 8 Korean provinces. Park Sun-young asked one final personal question regarding the carrier's continued residence at the original Sinchon studio apartment. Taehyung confirmed continued residence at the original studio and stated that personal lifestyle would not change under operational success. The interview concluded at 13:23, and Park Sun-young departed with materials for a feature publication scheduled for the following weekend. Taehyung returned to the executive office and reviewed the afternoon operational agenda across the next 4 scheduled meetings. The afternoon meetings covered international partnership expansion and regional office staffing and disbursement strategy planning across the upcoming quarter. The carrier completed all 4 meetings by 17:47 and departed the new headquarters through the executive-level private exit. The walk from the new headquarters to the original Sinchon studio took 31 minutes through familiar Hongdae and Sinchon streets. The studio remained unchanged from the original tenant occupation 13 months earlier across all visible interior and exterior dimensions. The small folding table still held a cup of instant noodles consumed earlier that morning before the new headquarters opening. Taehyung sat down at the folding table and opened the laptop to review the daily multiplier return summary report. At 1842 on Monday evening, the original homeless man from Sinchon Station Exit 4 appeared at the studio door. The old man had been located through Foundation outreach operations and had received housing assistance through the Mapo shelter program. The visitor introduced himself formally as Yu Sang-chul and presented a small wrapped package as a personal gift of gratitude. Yu Sang-chul was 67 years old and had served as a metal worker for 41 years before homelessness. The wrapped package contained a small, hand-carved wooden figurine of a traditional Korean scholar, made by Yu Sang-chul personally. The former homeless man had taken up wood carving during the housing assistance period as occupational therapy and personal expression. Taehyung accepted the figurine and invited Yu Sang-chul to share a simple meal at the small studio table. The two men shared instant noodles and conversation about the past 13 months across both of their separate operational periods.